Hello, today we're going to look at the antennas addendum, the addendum for section 18 on antennas. And this is a pretty short addendum. In fact, there's only two things to go over. And the first thing I want to talk about is how you can reflect radio signals off of various objects if you can't get your signal to go in the place you want it to go. So let's say you can't reach a distant station because something's in the way. Maybe there's a mountain standing in the way. So let's say that person on the left, that's you, your name's Bob. And this is Mountain, this is Mountain Bob, and yeah. Or let's call the mountain, I don't know, call the mountain whatever you want. We'll just call it a mountain. Yeah. And then over at the left, there's some guy named Billy. On the right, I'm sorry. And Bob is trying to talk to Billy, and he can't because every time he tries to transmit, his radio signals hit the mountain, and mountains eat radio waves. So Bob is sad because his signals are going into the mountain. So what does Bob do? How can Bob possibly talk to Billy? Well, I think we learned this in a previous lesson, but it's coming up again, so I'm going to repeat it here. If you can't reach a distant station because there's a mountain in the way or some kind of object in the way, if Bob can't get to Billy because of the mountain, what Bob should do is he should try to point his antenna in a different direction. Because if you'll remember from many lessons ago, sometimes your signal bounces off other objects, it might bounce off buildings, and it can get around the mountain. So instead of pointing right at Billy and hitting the mountain, Bob can instead point it off a skyscraper in New York City or something. Let's say he's near New York City, even though there are no mountains. Well, there are some mountains near New York City. But let's have him point the antenna in a different direction, and it'll bounce off a building. So this is the new Bob. And there's still a mountain in the way. But now there's New York City. So if he points his signal at a skyscraper or something, yes, there's the mountain. He can get around the mountain and he can get to Billy, who's over in the country. So the signal goes out from Bob and it goes. Yeah, and that's how Bob can talk to Billy. You can point your signal around. You be creative and try reflecting it off different things, and you can get around the mountain. Actually, some hams actually bounce stuff off a mountain, especially in Alaska. They bounce stuff off a mountain and end up talking to other people. My grandpa lived in Florida. He would bounce his radio signals off of the swimming pool in his backyard, and apparently that actually worked pretty well. So that's the first thing. The second thing I want to talk about is antenna loading. We're going to talk about antenna loading. So sometimes your antenna is too short, and we're going to learn a lot about this in the next section on coax, but this has to do with something called SWR. If your antenna is too short, you could have some serious problems where the radio waves will actually stand still inside your coax, and you'll have a lot of loss. Your signal will be dissipated as heat instead of going out in the air, and you could even damage your radio. Anyway, sometimes your antenna is too short. It needs to be longer in order to work properly at the frequency you're trying to transmit on. And this is where antenna loading comes in. And antenna loading is basically you attach an inductor to the antenna, and this actually makes it electrically longer. So it's not physically longer, but to the radio from an electrical standpoint, it appears to be longer. It acts like it's longer than it is due to the inductor. And this is almost similar to an antenna tuner, which, again, we're going to learn about next lesson. So I won't go into that here, but I encourage you to study for this section and take the quiz, and then you'll find out what an antenna tuner is and SWR. And we're going to learn about coax, which is very, very similar to antennas. So I will see you then.